Our first question is that Maine has an ever-growing drug crisis. Police and fire rescue workers are responding to more and more emergency calls, dealing with overdoses and administering life-saving drugs such as Narcan to those who are either accidentally or intentionally overdosing. This is a contributing factor to an ever-growing crisis and a strain on community resources and budgets. The governor has implied that all we're doing is enabling drug users to overdose, knowing that they may probably, or more probably than not, be saved by drug countering injections given by police or fire rescue workers. What legislation would you consider introducing or supporting to help resolve this crisis and reduce drug use and costs in providing emergency medical services? House District 45, we'll start with Dale.
Well, of course, interdiction of drug trafficking is something we need to put our full energy into. And I think on that front, I think the governor has been very energetic, to his credit. But I think where he has fallen short is I am not going to try to enter into his thought process, but his policies seem to be saying these lives are not worth saving. If someone is a drug addict, their life is not worth saving. If they need Narcan, their life is not worth saving. And I can't accept that premise. All of Mainers' lives are worth saving. We need to fight for every one of those lives. And we know that Narcan does save lives. Many of you, I have spoken with EMTs who have administered Narcan. And one of the things that is discouraging about it, number one, it does save lives, there's no question about that. But what is discouraging about it is if you don't get the person into treatment immediately, they will relapse very frequently, very commonly, back into the drug treatment or drug addiction that they were engaged in previously. So I absolutely support making Narcan available to first responders. My opponent also joined with the governor in trying to stand in the way of that. You know, this is something that we talk about as though it's a political issue. It isn't. It's a scientific issue. We need to look to professionals who know something about treatment. And the Mid-Coast Hospital, and a few others, but I will just focus on Mid-Coast, has come up with very effective treatment programs. Their theory is that you must get someone immediately into treatment. So many of the programs now take 2 to 3 weeks of wait time. You get the Narcan, then you are told, wait, we'll see you in 3 weeks. That is a formula for disaster. So we know now what works. We know that Mid-Coast has had tremendous success by giving immediate treatment to the recipients of the Narcan. And you know, there's an element of this that doesn't get talked about a lot, and that is that the rejection of Medicaid expansion, which again my opponent was with the governor on, has left a large percentage of our young people without any health insurance, and their only place to turn to for health insurance is the emergency room. So they're not getting preventive treatment, they're not getting the optimal services at the early phases of the problem, and I think that is leading to a lot of this expansion. So I would say that our emphasis has to be on what works. We don't need to have politicians inserting themselves in that thought process. We need to look at what the medical profession, what the scientific profession has found works, and do those things. Take the Mid-Coast model, take other models that work, and expand upon them.
Thank you. And I'd like just to take a half a second to again remind our candidates that there is no rebuttal in this forum. So we'd like you to state your position on the issues and not the positions of your opponents. Thank you. Mike?
Thank you. So I don't get a chance to rebut. That's quite okay.
Thank you.
Let me just give you a couple of figures that make this one of the most serious issues in our state. When 1,085 babies are born each year, already addicted. That's sad in itself. When 300 people in the state of Maine die yearly from heroin, that's a problem. I'm positive, as I sit here, that our leader, the governor, knows that this is a very serious issue as well. We added $23 million to hire drug agents and to hire people to help out because our jails are full and overflowing. The guards in those jails, it's very, very hard for them to keep a job very long because of the abuse that they have to take. So the treatment plan did become part of the last bill that went forward with the county jails and with adding a new wing in South Wyndham where they could put 132 beds for treatment as part of that. So some of what my opponent's saying is partially true, but he doesn't know all the answers to what has taken place behind the scene this past year. And there's been a lot because this really and truly is a serious problem. And I didn't vote against Narcan, and again, that came up as part of a bill which added 75,000 needles to it. And I didn't like the fact that those 75,000 needles were going to be handed out to go along with this plan. So once they added the needles to it, I was opposed to it. I'm not necessarily against anything that will save an individual's life. As a matter of fact, I would want to do everything in my power to save a life. So I believe that there's going to be a lot more coming before criminal justice and the 128th that's going to deal with this very serious issue. And I kind of thought tonight was going to be about citizens' initiatives.
Me too.
But I was wrong, so I spent quite a lot of time with that. And when you look at the marijuana issue, and I did spend 47 years working with teenagers, and I watched what happened when kids started smoking marijuana. They would start missing more school, they would start coming in late, and they had to have a way to buy that stuff. They were usually buying it in the school population because there were people there selling. So I witnessed that. I also witnessed their attendance go down, their grades go down, and their attendance would drop off, and their grades would drop off, and their attitudes would change, and it also brought a negative twist into the school. So with that, I will stop and know that this is just the beginning of a lot more that needs to be done in this area. Thank you.
Our next question is, deals with education. Previously, the Maine legislature passed a measure that requires the state, or would require the state, to fund 55% of the cost of education in public schools. We have not yet achieved that level of funding, and some would say we never will. What can the Maine legislature do that will help achieve the 55% funding level, or should the law be changed to reduce that level of funding? And we're going to start with the candidates from District 45, and Dale first.
I think that we can't not talk about the referendum item because the very point of the referendum item is to provide that 55% funding. So I know that you wanted to talk about referendum items separately, but that's kind of front and center here. We did make a promise to our Maine voters that we would be funding schools at 55% from the state level, and we're not doing that. And as a result, we are over-relying on the property tax. If there is one endemic problem with our tax system in Maine, It's that we are over-reliant on our property tax. Those of us who are knocking on doors, and I'm sure that Mike is experiencing this, and I'm sure that Rachel, Lynn, and Sue are experiencing it as well. We hear time and again, especially from seniors, that they are being pushed out of their home, that their property tax goes up every year, and they're on a fixed income that does not go up every year. So I think that we have to look at ways to fund that 55% that does not put a crushing burden on the property tax. And so I will support the referendum item and what it achieves. I feel very strongly that everything, and we're going to get into the impact on the economy later, but everything that we need to do about improving the economy in Maine has something to do with education. We need to focus heavily and intelligently on how do we develop a skilled workforce, how does every kid in Maine develop skills that will put them in a strong position for the rest of this century. And one of the things that I worry about is we can't think just about the kids in Gray or in my life, the kids in Cumberland or the rest of the districts that Bart and Kathy would be dealing with. We need to think about the rest of Maine. We have Millinocket, we have down east, we've got places all over the state where we want those children to have an equal opportunity. And what I really think the best way to do this, I will support this referendum, but I don't like it, I guess I would have to say. The way I think we should do this is the way Dick Woodbury was trying to approach it when he was the senator, and I know he's been very supportive of Kathy Breen. But Dick Woodbury tried to put together a fairly thoughtful, balanced approach to how do we get to a fair and reasonable level of tax support. And that would include expansion of the service taxes, expansion of the sales taxes, trying to collect more from out-of-staters who are in visiting the state, and take some of the burden off the rest of us. So between the referendum kind of does the job in a sledgehammer way, but I don't think it is optimal. I hope over time the legislature will look at other ways to get to that 55%.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. There are a few facts that in the last year, there were 25,000 fewer students in Maine schools. It was a fact that we did, before the session ended, add 15 million more to the budget to help some. And it is a fact that the overall cost per student has risen 4,000, I think, per student. Those are fairly factual. And to reach 55%, that number, and to deal with the school without looking at some consolidation, that's not a very popular thing to do, and I know because I've been there. But the number of school administrators to carry this out, superintendents, principals, assistant principals, special ed directors, all of them combined, the percent of that money that's used for those staff should be looked at, but it's not easy to do. None of them really and truly want to do it. Certainly the unions do not participate in that kind of thinking. So I'm not sure if anyone really knows exactly what percent we're giving, because the variables within that 55% make it hard to come up with. If you had to put them on a piece of paper and say, this is what makes up 55% of the funding, I don't think you can do that very easy. The legislation is mostly the answer. We're the ones that are lawmakers, we're the ones that set the funds in place. I guess the overall cost per student cost when it gets up to approximately 20,000 or 18 to 20,000 per student, it makes people become very uneasy about the spending on school and school finance.
Thank you. On the ballot is an act to establish the Fund to Advance Public Kindergarten to grade 12 education. The ballot question reads, do you want to add a 3% tax on individual Maine taxable income above $200,000 to create a state fund that would provide direct support for student learning in kindergarten through 12th grade public education?
Thank you. Let's go back just a minute. I agree with that on what he said. I wonder in the bill if we're talking about 200,000 per household or per individual in the household. That would need to be clarified for sure. The 200,000, are we talking about household, or are we talking about just one individual?
My guess after reading it and knowing tax law is probably that it is if you file jointly, it would be that number. If you file separately, it would be that number.
Let's look at the fact that this money would go to the general fund. And then the legislation would decide what percent of it or how much of it went to education. Now let's look at the Maine State Lottery, for example. And the Maine State Lottery had 57 million in profits left over in the year. Would that money, if it had stayed the way it was supposed to when the lottery was designed or set up and the highway construction paid off, that 57 million is not designated to go to 1 penny in education. But now we're figuring we'll just put another tax on. We'll try to go back to the question that's coming up soon, or maybe we're not going to get to it, that the taxes are one of the biggest reasons why businesses move out of Maine. Now you want to tax the people that are working very hard or work very hard to earn this money, tax them a little more so that more of them will go to Florida. I went to 2 homes within the last week. Both of them had for sale signs on them, and one of them said, I can't support you or vote for you because my residence is now Florida. And that happens more than you know. So if you think that that citizens' initiative is such a good idea, then I'm afraid that you'll be sitting here later saying, yes, that wasn't such a good idea.
Thank you, Dale.
I just have to say, as an overall statement, that making law by referendum is a bad way to make law. There is a way we are intended to make law, which is a proposal is put forward, there are public hearings, there is expert testimony, there is a protracted discussion, there is give and take, the Republicans and the Democrats each have to compromise. That's the way we're intended to make law. In this current legislature, what has happened is Governor LePage and a small band of loyalists in the House of Representatives have basically made it impossible to move forward with any compromise legislation. So that's why you have this list of referenda. I don't like the referenda. I have to hold my nose to support these referendum items because they are not ideal. They are not fully thought through. They don't have both sides' perspectives. I do believe, as Kathy said, the solutions to our most dire problems in this state are education. We need to focus on education. I think that this is probably a necessary short-term action, and I do note that income taxes were decreased in 2011 and 2015. So for someone at the $200,000 level, You know, they're really, they got some upside from those cuts. But coming back to, you know, the Dick Woodbury approach, I hope that the legislature over time will take a more subtle and a more comprehensive and a more organic look at what is the optimal tax structure to achieve our 55% support for schools. I don't think we should back away from that. I think we need to say, yes, we are going to provide that 55% funding. Is this the best way to do it? It feels to me like it's a bit of a sledgehammer. I don't fully think it's the right way to go, but I think it, for the time being, is what we have to do.
Thank you. What must Maine do to become a more business-friendly state, attracting not just developing small businesses, but major job providing businesses? Dale?
The question that you had, Brad, here is what must Maine do to provide a more business-friendly state? It starts, I think, from the top. I think you need leadership. And I think that has been sadly lacking here in Maine. One of the things we hear, if you live in Maine and you read the newspapers and you listen to the governor, you would think that we have the highest energy costs in New England. We do not. We have the lowest energy costs in New England. And yet we hear that day in, day out. Why is Boston booming? Is it because they have low energy costs, or is it because they have low taxes? No, it is not. It is because of intellectual capital and a skilled workforce. That is what is driving the economy. That is what must drive our economy, a skilled workforce. You know, Maine has a wonderful tradition. I don't feel pessimistic. Maine has a wonderful tradition of innovation, of coming up with ideas, of tinkering and putting together things in a new way. And I think that we need to put all of our energy into developing that skilled workforce, all the way from the K-12 to the tech schools, to the community colleges, to making USM an R&D center for industry. And we need, we were both, Sue, at a program for engineers where they said we need to increase the number of engineers in the state by 100% for the next few years, by 100%. We need to do the things that create the skilled workforce. That is the number one issue, and I think this governor has been looking backwards and not forwards. And we need to link all of our educational activities to what we think are realistically the types of jobs we're going to have in the future. And by the way, one of the interesting things that we're starting to see, and the engineers, again, Sue was there and we both heard this together, one of the things they're starting to see is that manufacturing that has been going overseas, we've all seen that happen, jobs have been going overseas because of cheap labor, but with the onset of robotics, those jobs are going to come back to America. So what we're going to need is to have the skilled people who bring the skills, who bring the knowledge to make the best products, again, here in Maine, here in America. We need infrastructure. We get that also on the referendum, but we have let our infrastructure fall apart. If you're a business that is looking to relocate in Maine, infrastructure is a huge issue. The roads, the bridges, even the broadband internet. What have we done to make it plausible for a business to succeed in Maine? You know, one of the things that Sue said I have to agree with is that we need to make sure that our regulation is focused on accomplishing the objective, but in the most efficient way, in the most business-friendly way, in the most quick way. And you know, you're right, Sue, that they want predictability. They want the answer quickly, and they don't want it to be changed next week. And I don't think that is a Democratic or a Republican issue. That's a business smart issue. We need to protect our environment. We need to protect our employees, but we need to do it in a way that is responsive to business. And the last thing I would say that I think is a critical piece of what makes Maine successful in the future is the natural resources that are our birthright here in Maine. Everything about the clean air, the clean water, the beauty, everything that we have here that makes people come to Maine and love it in Maine, That is a huge asset that we should not undervalue. People will come here for that. Businesses will come here because it is clean, the traffic is low, the opportunities are wonderful, the people are good, the work ethic is strong. We have, let's not talk ourselves down. We have some wonderful things about Maine that we need to focus on. So I feel like our need here in Maine is to, number one, focus on that skilled workforce. We need to build a fertile ground for entrepreneurship. I don't think we need to pick where the winners are going to be, but I think we need to make an environment where businesses can succeed. And we need to be a state that says, we want a vibrant economy. We don't want to just be retirees from away and vacationers. We need a vibrant economy that enables our young people to build lives here in Maine.
Thank you, Mike.
I'll be very brief. I had almost the exact same things written down as Sue entered. She started with energy, and I agree with that. It's too high. Regulations, there's too many. Taxes, we're not business-friendly as far as taxes, and the cost of doing business. And lastly, our youth, a process and a procedure that would possibly just keep more of our bright youth back here in Maine.
Thank you.